In the earlier class, we have discussed about the select config and the select context and how to configure parameters at the config level and how to configure the parameters at the context level and how the config and context can be placed in a servlet application. Okay. Today we are going to discuss the request dispatching mechanism. Request dispatching mechanism. What is the request dispatching mechanism? Okay, how we can dispatch a request? What is dispatching a request means? Okay, sending the same request or passing the same request from one web resource to another web resource. Passing the same request object from one web resource to another web resource is called as request dispatching. Passing the same request from one web resource to another web resource. Passing the same request from one web resource to another web resource is called as request dispatching. There are multiple ways how we can pass a request from one web resource to another web resource. Okay, let's consider like if it is a HTML and servlet, then we can either go for a hyperlink or a form submission to send a request from HTML to servlet. But if you want to send a request from a servlet to another servlet, or if you want to pass the same request from one servlet to another servlet, definitely we should go for a request dispatching mechanism. Let's consider like I have two servlets. Login servlet and in the login servlet let me develop a form in the login servlet. Just I'm giving a simple form. It's not a valid form practically, but just in the login servlet again I am developing a form. okay, whose action is okay. Hello dot first, okay, method is post, method is post. Now let me develop another servlet. Let me copy these things and select content. Let me develop this as first servlet. This I have developed a very simple servlet which is named as first servlet. So let me compile the application. Let me see in the login servlet. In the login servlet I have written the business logic here. Let me write it here. But before that we should write HTML body okay. Now what I have done is I have developed a login servlet. In the login servlet response I have developed a form where I can submit to another servlet which is first servlet, okay, and I have developed a first servlet and I am doing nothing, just I am getting the request and I am printing that inside do post I am in the first servlet. Now let me get the request parameters. and just let me print the request object. Let me print the request object, and even here let me print the request object. Let me print the request object first. What I'm doing is I'm printing the request object, okay, and I'm creating a form. On submit, this form will navigate to first servlet. In the first servlet, I'm getting request.get parameter username, password, description. So let me configure this first servlet in web.xml. Now let me develop a servlet tag. No loader sub is required. Name is first servlet. Servlet name is first servlet. Let me map this servlet with a mapping tag. Okay. This I have configured the first servlet and I have mapped to start.first. So something.first will go to the first servlet. So in the response of login servlet, what I have done, I have created a form. On submit, that form will go to first servlet. Okay, and the method is post. Understood what I have done? From login.html will go to login servlet. From login servlet there will be another form. When I submit that form, it will go to first servlet. Okay. Now let me try to compile those things. Close compile. Now let me go to the scene and start the server. The server is started, and if you see here, there is loadout setup for login servlet. So the server is started already. So now let me go to the browser. Let me try to request to that servlet. Okay. Is that the problem? Mm-hmm. What the fuck it is? So, if I enter some description, just a proper refresh was not made, that's the problem. Okay. If I enter some description, now here my request object is available. Let me go back to that. Let me stop the server. Compile the, sorry. Let me change it to earlier. Inside do post something. Inside the do post of login servlet, I am printing the request object. Just let me compile the application. Start the server. Login the HTML. Let me refresh the page. Just give the username and password. Is that the difference? Why it is behaving this much different? I'm not sure what it makes the difference for a servlet if this out.println is first or last. I'll do some research on that. But now I have a request object of type request package implementation which have some hexadecimal address, something like 1EBFA. This is the class name at the rate hexadecimal representation of the address in the heap. Okay, so now let me enter some description. Okay, and click on submit. So that where it will go? Now, right now, is the first servlet what we call life cycle started? No, the first servlet. If you see here, in the first servlet life cycle, in the first servlet we have system.out.println inside init first servlet. So now is that displayed in the console inside init first servlet? No. That means the first servlet life cycle has not yet started. First servlet life cycle will be started only when we send the first request to the servlet. Just because the first servlet, you see the servlet tag of the first servlet, it is not a load on startup. Since it is not a load on startup, the servlet life cycle of the first servlet will start only when we send a request to the first servlet. So let me submit this. So inside the first servlet, now the servlet life cycle of the first servlet is started. If you see here, init method is executed and even the corresponding do post method is also executed. Now, are the request parameters of login servlet available in the first servlet? Are the request parameters of login servlet available in the first servlet? What are the values? Request.get parameter of username and password. I am giving request.get parameter of username and password. Now, see, from the login.html, the request parameters will go to login servlet. From here, again I am submitting the form. So, will it create a new request and response, or will it carry the existing request itself? Understood my question? So, from, I don't have a chalk actually. That's fine. Let's consider like I have 3 pages here. First one is the first page login.html, from where I am entering username and password and I am clicking on submit. When I click on submit, it will go to the if you go to another servlet where I display a description field and a submit button, where I'm displaying this description field and the submit button through the login servlet, through the form developed in the login servlet. So when I click on submit button there, will it create a new request or will it carry forward the existing request itself? If the existing request is carried forward, then why the request parameters of username and password are not available? Understand my question? If it carries forward the existing request from login servlet to first servlet, then why the request parameters username and password are nulls? Did we enter null username? Did we enter blank username and blank password in the field? No. Then why request parameters are going as nulls here? As per your analysis, your assumption, if the same request is transferred from login servlet to the first servlet, then request parameters should be available. But the request parameters are not available here. Does that mean a new request is created when we click on submit button from the login servlet? Does that mean a new request is created? A new request and new response are created when we click submit button on the login servlet? See, first we go for login.html where we enter the username and password. Okay, and submit. Now this is my login servlet. In the login servlet, I have a field which is named as description. If I enter some description and submit, here upon this submit, this is the response. This is the login servlet. This is the login servlet. Okay, this is the response of the login servlet. From the response of login servlet, if I click on submit button, again a new set of requests and response will be created, which will go to the first servlet. So for that new set of requests and response object, earlier requests parameters will not be available. Okay, so only the description parameter is available. Just because whenever we click a submit or whenever we access a hyperlink, a new request object will be created. Here from HTML page to login servlet, one request object is created. Again from login servlet to first servlet, another request object is created. Understand? The same request is not carried forward in this case. But if you want to carry forward the same request between multiple dynamic web resources, if you want to carry forward the same request object between multiple dynamic web resources, like a servlet and JSP, or a servlet and a servlet, or from a JSP to a servlet, we should go for a request dispatcher. Through form submission, we cannot carry forward the same request from one servlet to another servlet, or from one dynamic web resource to another dynamic web resource. Through form submission or through hyperlinks, we cannot carry forward the same request from one servlet to another servlet. If we go for form submission, definitely a new request and new response object will be created for the target servlet. So, we should go for a request dispatcher mechanism if you want to carry forward the same request from one servlet to another servlet. So, why should we send the same request from one servlet to another servlet? Let's consider like there is a complex process, okay, where there are 10 different things to do. Well, there is a complex process where there are 10 different things to do. Rather than writing all those 10 different things in the same servlet, each and every part will be written in a servlet so that there will be better decoupling. Let's consider like there are 10 steps. Okay, there are 10 steps. Okay, for a process. Okay, and rather than writing those 10 steps, let's consider those 10 steps are used for one process. Among those 10 steps, only 5 steps are used by another process. Among those 10 steps, only 7 steps are used by another process. Now, let's consider like I am writing 3 servlets for this case. Okay, for the first process, I will write a servlet with all the 10 steps logic. For the second process, I will write the logic for all the 5 steps. For the third process, I'll write the logic for all the seven servlets. For all the seven steps in the servlet. Now, what happens? Is the code duplicated here? Understood my point? See, there are 10 steps. Okay? For the first process, all the 10 steps are required. For the second process, 7 steps are required. For the third process, 5 steps are required. Okay? Now, for the first process, I am developing a first servlet. So, in the first servlet, what I am doing? I am writing the logic related to 10 steps. Again, go to the second servlet. The second servlet, for the second process, I need 7 steps. So, again I am writing the logic for 7 steps. And in the third servlet, I have 5 steps. So, again I am writing logic for 5 steps. Now, is there any repetition of code here? Yes. So, there is a repetition of code. So, to avoid this kind of repetition of code, what we will do? Each and every step related logic will be written in a servlet. But these steps are another process of the same request. But in the same request, in the same process, okay, these are multiple steps. So among those steps, do we need to share the same request or do we need to send another request from one servlet to another servlet? Let's select for each and every step I have developed a servlet. Understand? For each and every step I have developed a servlet. So all those servlets belong to the same process. If all those servlets belong to the same process, do we need to pass the same request along those 10 servlets or do we create a new request from when we go from one servlet to another servlet? So the same request should be passed along the 10 servlets, just because all those 10 servlets will be a group of the same process. But each and every servlet will perform specific business logic in the process. So same request object should be shared for all the 10 servlets. So how we can share or how we can dispatch a same request into multiple servlets? Basically, why we should send the same request into multiple servlets means this is the requirement where the business logic of a process is distributed into multiple servlets. And if there is only one request for a process, then the same request should be shared between all the servlets. Okay? So, how we can do that? How we can achieve that? Now, is same request shared or a new request is created for first servlet, from login to servlet to first servlet? In this case, when we try to access the login servlet, login.html, if we click on submit, we will go to the login servlet. From login servlet, if I enter some description and submit, another request object is created from login servlet to first servlet. Understood, Charan? I need to be okay. It appears to be the same, but it's not the same. Same request object will not be shared between multiple requests. But something is there, but it's not like the same request is shared between same request object is shared between multiple requests. A different request object will be created. Request will be destroyed when the service method is over. Okay? The same request object will not be reused. A new request object will be created. But let's see later. It's not that much important for us. So, a new request object is created for us. Then what I need to do is I need to share the same request object between login servlet and first servlet. If I want to do that, what I'll do is I'll go for a request dispatcher mechanism. Now, how I can share the same request? How I can share the same request between both the servlets? We should go for a request dispatcher. We should go for a request dispatcher. This request dispatcher. Request dispatcher exists in Java.servlet package. Request dispatcher is not specific to any protocol. Request dispatcher is a concept which is generic. In any protocol, we can achieve request dispatching mechanism. So, it is there in javax.servlet package. I have imported that. Okay, request dot get request dispatcher, where we give the URL pattern. What is the URL pattern of the second servlet? Something dot first. While creating the request dispatcher itself, will provide. Okay, while creating the request dispatcher, will provide the URL pattern of the target servlet, to which the request is supposed to be dispatched. The URL of the target servlet to which the request is supposed to be dispatched. Okay. Just before request dispatching, I am writing some model.println, and even after request dispatch object creation, I am writing some model.println. Then, if you want to dispatch a request, we go for either of two methods. First, let me show you how forward will work. The request dispatcher can be created. The request dispatcher can be created from a request object. Just we go for request dot get request dispatcher by passing the URL of the target server to which the request is supposed to be dispatched. Okay? And once we got the request dispatcher object, okay, we can execute one of the two methods. Either we can go for forward. In the request dispatcher, we have two methods. We have forward, we have include. Okay? Forward will dispatch the request in one way, include will dispatch the request in another way. Okay? Forward and include are completely opposite. First we will see how we can dispatch a request using forward and what are the properties of forward, and then after we will see how we can dispatch a request using include. Okay? So, but either we use forward or include, creation of request dispatcher object is the same. Okay? Just we go for request object dot get request dispatcher. Okay, the request object dot get request dispatcher. Just I'll try to forward. To the forward method, we need to send the request and response objects. Just we send request and response objects. We send request and response objects to the forward. So the same request and the same response are being forwarded to first servlet. New request object is not created. The same request and the same response are forwarded to the first servlet. To which servlet the request and the response are forwarded to is based on the service specification. So, let me try to compile this application. Let me stop the servlet. Compile the application. Clear the screen. Restart the server. Server is started. Then let me try to go for login servlet. Let me refresh the browser. Just we go for some request parameters. Okay. Now I'm in the first servlet. Okay. Now are the request parameters available? ABD and 1, 2, 3. But we don't have any description field, so this request parameter will be none. Okay, but we have do we have the same request parameters available? Do we have the same request parameters available even in the first servlet? But actually these are, you see here, but I did not write any out.system.out.println here. Let me write some system.out.println. Stop the server, recompile, restart. So now if I submit, triple one is username, ABC is the password. If I click on submit, okay, triple one is the username and ABC is the password. Now if you see here, is it going to login servlet? Is it going to login servlet? Yes or no? Is it coming back to login servlet? Is it going to first servlet? Yes. But is login servlet response visible in the browser? Is login servlet response visible in the browser? Yes or no? No. Why it happens means, okay, whenever request dispatcher is used to forward a request from one servlet to another servlet, whenever the request dispatcher is used to forward a request from one servlet to another servlet, okay, the response buffer will be clear. The response buffer will be clear. How the response object will send the information into the browser means, let's consider like there is some 100 bytes of data. So it will not send all the data at a time. So it will maintain a buffer and it will send the response to the browser as chunks. But it is such faster that we cannot recognize that through our eye. Whenever we click on submit, we will see the response on the target page, target browser. But it will go as chunks. Okay, the response will go as chunks. The response will maintain a buffer and it will go as chunks. So for that reason, okay, the response will maintain a buffer. But the response buffer contains the actual content that is to be displayed in the browser. But what happens when the request dispatcher is used to forward a request from one servlet to another servlet? The response buffer will be cleared. So if the response buffer is clear, there is nothing to print in the browser. So it goes to the second servlet. It goes to the target servlet to which the request is dispatched. Now this content is printed in the browser, but not the existing content. Just because that is the property of forward. That is the feature of forward. When we forward a request from one servlet to another servlet means we are forwarding with such an assumption that there is no response printed in the browser in the first servlet, in the login servlet. When we dispatch a request from login servlet to first servlet using forward, we should know when to use forward. When we use forward means when we are not giving any response to the browser in the login servlet. When we dispatch the request from login servlet to the first servlet, when we use forward to dispatch that request means when we are not giving any response from the login servlet, from the servlet where we are dispatching the request. The whole response will be returned in the servlet to which the request is dispatched. But if we write a response, or if you are sending a response to the servlet, if you are sending a response to the browser, even from login servlet also, then to include that response, we go for include. Understand? When we go for forward and when we go for include, okay? In forward mechanism, what we will do is we will write the business logic in the prior servlets. In the earlier servlets, we will write the business logic. In the last servlet, we will write the UI logic, UI interaction logic. Okay? Let's consider like there are 5 servlets. The first 4 servlets we will write the business logic. We don't write any content that interacts with the browser. But in the last servlet, we write the UI interaction logic that will send some response to the browser. Okay? Let's consider like there are 5 servlets, and from the first servlet request is dispatched to the second to third, third to the fourth, and fourth to fifth. Now, if I have written out.println in all the 5 servlets, now will all the out.printlns will be printed in the browser only the fifth servlet out.println is printed in the browser. If you go for forward, only fifth servlet out.println is printed in the browser. Understood? Understood or not? Okay, if we have 5 servlets and we are dispatching the request from one servlet to another servlet, if all those 5 servlets has some logic which will send some content to the browser, not all the 5 servlet content will be included to the browser. Only the 5th servlet content will be sent to the browser if we dispatch the request from one servlet to another servlet with forward. Why and when we use forward means when we want to write the business logic in some servlets and we want to write the UI interaction logic in the last servlet. In that case, we go for forward. But if you want to write UI interaction logic in each and every servlet in the request dispatcher mechanism, then we go for include. Understood? How forward and include will work? Now, if I don't change any code, just I have changed forward to include, that's it. If I change forward to include and if I stop the server, and restart the server and recompile the application. So, is the login servlet content printed in the browser? Is login servlet content printed in the browser? Yes or no? Yes. Just because we have used include method of request dispatcher to dispatch the request from login servlet to first servlet. Understand? That's the difference between forward and include. Okay? Forward will just forward the request from one servlet to another servlet in the request dispatcher mechanism, and before forwarding the request from one servlet to the other servlet, something like source and target. Okay? Let's consider like login servlet is the source and first servlet is the target. So while dispatching the request from the source to the target using a forward mechanism, okay, request dispatcher dot forward, what the web server will do means the web server will clear the response buffer of the source servlet. But if it is include, then the response of the source servlet will be included in the target servlet. Understood the difference? If it is a request dispatcher dot forward, and if you are forwarding the same request from the source to the target, and if the request dispatcher mechanism is done through forward method, what happens is the web server before forwarding the request from the source servlet to the target servlet will clear the response buffer, and then only the request and response are forwarded to the target servlet. But in case of include, what happens is the response of the source servlet will be first included in the target servlet, then the request is being forwarded, or then the request is being included. Understood? Then the request, first the response of the source servlet is included in the target servlet, then only the request will be dispatched from source to target. Understood the difference? So it's not like we cannot tell either forward is better or include is better. It depends upon the requirement. Okay, if you want to write the business logic, or if you want to write some logic in few servlets, and if you want to write the presentation logic in the last servlet, then we go for forward. If you want to write the presentation logic means the logic that we write in output.println, that will go to the browser. The logic that is displayed in the browser is presentation logic. Okay? If you want to write the presentation logic in all the servlets, then we go for include. If you want to write the business presentation logic only in the last servlet, but the prior servlets include some basic logic, then we go for forward. Okay? If you want to include, or if you want to write the presentation logic in all the servlets, then we go for include. If that is not the case, then we go for forward. You cannot tell which one is better. Some of the interviewers will try to confuse you. Which one is better, forward or include? It depends upon the requirement. If you want to write presentation logic only in the last servlet, and if you are sure that we are not writing any presentation logic in the prior servlets, then we go for forward. Okay? And if you are writing presentation logic in all the servlets, then we go for include. Understood? Now, let me write another servlet, which is a second servlet. Okay, let me save this as second servlet.java, and let me register this servlet in the web.xml. No? I have developed another servlet which is second servlet where I have registered that in the web.xml. Okay? So let me forward the request from login servlet to the first servlet. Let me forward it. Okay? In the same way, let me create a request dispatcher even in the first servlet. Just I am forwarding the request from the first servlet to, let me go for second, so that it will go to the second servlet. So let me import the request dispatcher. So from login servlet I am dispatching the same request to first servlet. From the first servlet I am dispatching the same request to second servlet. Now let me see whether the second servlet, okay, response is included or all the servlets response is included. Let me try to compile the application. It was compiled. Let me try to start the server. Server is started. Now let me try to access the login page. Let me try to refresh the page. I have given username and password and click on submit. Now where the control is? Okay, the control has been transferred from login servlet to first servlet to second servlet, but only the second servlet response is included in the browser. Login servlet response is ignored, as well as first servlet response is also ignored in the browser. So if you see here, in the login servlet we have out.println. Even in the first servlet we have out.println. Even in the second servlet we have out.println. But in the browser, whose content is printed? Whose content is printed? Only second servlet content is printed. Just because only the final servlet, only the final target content is printed if you go for forward. Okay? If you go for forward, only the final target content is printed. Okay? Understood? But if you see here in the console, from login servlet it goes to the first servlet, from first servlet it goes to the second servlet, from the second servlet again it returns back to the login servlet. The mechanism will go the same, but the response handling will be different. Okay? But if you go for include in the same case, now from login servlet to first servlet it is forward, but from first servlet to second servlet it is include. Then what happens? Understood my time? From login servlet to first servlet it is forward, but from first servlet to second servlet it is include. Then what happens? First and second servlet response will be included in the browser. It will be allowed. Some of the interviewers will be asking this kind of questions. Let's consider I have 3 servlets. From first servlet to second servlet I will forward, but from second servlet to third servlet I will include. Okay? Is this allowed? Yes, definitely allowed. So which servlet response is included? The first servlet as well as second servlet. Now what I will do is, from login servlet to first servlet, I will include okay. From first servlet to second servlet, I will forward. Okay. Then which servlet response is included in the browser? Understood my thing? From login servlet to first servlet it is include. From first servlet to second servlet it is forward. Then what are all the servlets content displayed in the browser? Login in? Only second servlet. It is correct. Just because the same request and response objects are dispatched from login servlet to first servlet to second servlet. But when it comes from login servlet to first servlet, what happens? The login servlet response is included in the first servlet. So now the first servlet response contains the response of login servlet plus response of first servlet. But when the request is forwarded from first servlet to second servlet, the response will be flushed out, or the response will be clear. The response is clear, it contains a combined response of login servlet and first servlet. The whole thing will be clear. So only the second servlet response will be included in the browser. So if there is one forward, means only the target will be displayed in the browser. Just let me try to go for login.html, refresh the page. So here only second servlet response is included in the browser. Understood why? What, Babu? Understood why it is including only the second servlet response in the browser? No? See, from login servlet, go to first servlet. From first servlet, go to the second servlet. Now from login servlet to first servlet, is it forward or include now? What are you listening, man? What you are listening? Are you following the class? Now, from login servlet, you will go to the first servlet. Now, from login servlet to the first servlet, how the request is dispatched? Through forward or include? Include. Okay? From first servlet to second servlet? Forward. That means from login to servlet to first servlet, include will be there. So, the response of login servlet will be included in the first servlet. Then the first servlet response contains the combined response of login servlet and first servlet. Understood? Now from first servlet, are we doing a forward or include to the second servlet? Forward. Then the first servlet contains the combined response of login servlet and the first servlet. But from first servlet, what we are doing? We are dispatching a request to second servlet. While dispatching a request to second servlet, are we forwarding or are we including? What, man? See the highlighted thing. Are we sending the request through forward or include? Forward. Then when we execute forward method of request dispatcher, what happens? Response buffer of the source will be cleared. What is the source here? What is the source here and what is the target here in request dispatcher? Second servlet is it a source or target? What I am asking? I am asking that What is now? I have a request dispatcher object here, and request dispatcher will have a source as well as target. Target means to which servlet the request is dispatched. Source is from which servlet the request is being dispatched. Okay? What is the source and what is the target here? What? Did you understand or not? What I am telling? Did you understand what I am telling? Speak out, man. Only if you speak out, I can answer. I can understand. And I can explain it in more detail. Where you are confused, just tell that. Speak out. Speak out, man, where you are confused or where you are blocked, so that I can explain it once again. Did you understand the request dispatcher mechanism? How it works? Huh? Then why did you not ask that? You should ask that, right? If you are not getting the point, then you should ask the question that I did not understand this. Please explain once again. If you are dumb, how I can understand? See, request dispatcher mechanism. We have a chart here. Sir, please bring it if possible. See, being dumb will not give anything. You speak out. If you can't speak out, take your luggage and go home. This is the last chance that I am giving to you. In tomorrow's class, we are not speaking out means I'll send you home. That's it. So, the request dispatcher mechanism, how it will happen is, did you understand why request dispatcher is required? I'm asking you, man, did you understand why request dispatcher is required? Did you understand why request dispatcher is required? No? Are you listening to the class? Yes? Just from this class, from this half an hour of class, what did you understand? Just speak out. You have listened to the class for half an hour. What did you understand? Just speak out. What did you understand from this half an hour? That means you are not listening to the classes. Then why you are here? Basically, we want to split the logic of a servlet into multiple servlets. We want to split the logic of the same process into multiple servlets. What we do is we develop multiple servlets. And the same request and response objects are shared between all the servlets. Now from the browser, this is the browser, some http something. A request will be sent, we submit a username, password, and click on submit. Then the control let's consider like this is the login servlet. First servlet and second servlet. Okay. From the login servlet, let's consider like this is the browser where we are accessing login.html. When we submit the form, the username and password will be sent as request parameters to login server. Okay. Why? When we need to dispatch the request means, when we go for request dispatcher mechanism means, when we share or when we split, when we want to split, okay, the servlet logic, or when we want to split the logic of a process into multiple servlets. When we want to split the logic of a process into multiple servlets, okay, then what we do is we write that logic into multiple servlets, but the process is same. So the request and response also should be the same. In that case, if you want to split the logic of process into multiple servlets, but the process is same, so the request and response should be the same across the servlets. In that case, what we do is we dispatch a request from one servlet to another servlet. Understood? Understood? So, what we do to dispatch a request from one servlet to another servlet? First, we create a request dispatcher object. How we will create a request dispatcher object means using the request object. Using the request object, we will create a request dispatcher object. Okay. Now here, the request dispatcher will have a source and target. Source means from where the request is being dispatched. Target means to which servlet the request is being dispatched. To which servlet request is being dispatched means it's based on the URL pattern that we give while creating a request dispatcher. Okay. Now what is the source here? What is the source here? What is the source here? Or what is the target? I am telling that source is the servlet from where request is dispatched. Target is the servlet to which the request is dispatched. Understood my point? Then what is the source and what is the target here? What is the source and what is the target here? Did you understand what is request dispatching? Did you understand my definition of source and target? Then answer that question, man. Why are you dumb? Do you think I'm a joker? Do all of your friends think I'm a joker? After the class, take your bag and leave out the town. Leave from the university. I don't want any such guys for me. I want guys who are really committed. After the class, I'm telling seriously, take your bag and leave the university. Then, just the request dispatcher, what it will do means, it will send the same request from one servlet to another servlet. Okay? So here we have created a request dispatcher object, okay, by sending the URL pattern of the first servlet. Now, from where we are dispatching the request? We are dispatching the request from the login servlet. So, login servlet will become the source and target will be the servlet to which I am dispatching the request. It is the first servlet. So, here in this request dispatching, the source is login servlet and the target is first servlet. So, from login servlet we are dispatching the request to first servlet. So, the source of request dispatching mechanism is login servlet and the target is first servlet. So, then what we are doing is we are performing the include mechanism. So, if we do include, what happens is this login servlet will have a response. That response will be included in the response of first servlet. passed to the first servlet. The same request and response objects are passed from login servlet to the first servlet. The same request and same response objects are passed from login servlet to the first servlet. Understood? And the response of login servlet will be included in the first servlet if you go for include. So now the response of first servlet contains a combined response of login servlet and even the first servlet. Now from first servlet to second servlet it is forward. So if you go for forward, what happens? What the web server will do means the web server first clear the response of the source. Now if you are dispatching the request from first servlet to second servlet, what is the source? If you are dispatching the request from first servlet to second servlet, what is the source here? If you are dispatching the request from first servlet to second servlet, what is the source? I am asking you. If I am dispatching the request from first servlet to second servlet, what is the source? The source is the first servlet here and the target is second servlet. So the request will be forwarded from first servlet to second servlet and source is first servlet and target is second servlet. So the request and response are being forwarded from source to target servlet. So, but if it is a forward mechanism, first what the web server will do is the web server will clear the response. So this response of first servlet contains the combined response of login servlet and first servlet. Just because between login and first servlet it is included. Understood? So before forwarding the request from first servlet to second servlet, first the web server will clear the response buffer which contains the combined response of login servlet and first servlet. So the second servlet has a response and only second servlet response will be sent to the browser in this case. Understood? Understood? So this is how the forward and include mechanisms will work in a request dispatcher. Okay? And as I told earlier, when we go for forward or when we go for include depends upon the requirement. Okay? If you want to write some logic in some earlier servlets, prior servlets, and if you want to write the presentation logic only in the final servlet, then we go for forward. We go for include when we want to write the presentation logic in all the servlets. But as a standard, forward is preferable. Just because it's not a correct way to write the presentation logic in all the servlets. It's not a standard approach to write the presentation logic in all the servlets. As a standard, I'll prefer forward mechanism. Just because the presentation logic and the business logic should be separated. So the presentation logic should be only there in the last servlet. That's what I prefer. But it might not be suitable for all the requirements. It might not be suitable for all the requirements. But in general, the industry standard is the business logic and the presentation logic should be separated. So in general, forward will be preferred. Okay? Just because if we go for forward, we can write the presentation logic, we can split the presentation logic and keep it in the last servlet. But there might be business critical scenarios where we write the presentation logic in all the servlets. In that case, we should go for include. I am not telling that include will not be used at all. Okay? But But even if there is least chance, forward is preferred. Okay? Even if there is least chance, forward is preferred. Okay? But if the business demands that we should send a response from each and every servlet, then we definitely go for include. It depends upon the business demand. The business demands the response should be sent from each and every servlet, then definitely we go for include. But if the business doesn't demand in such a way, then at that point of time we prefer forward to include. Just because we can write the presentation logic in the last servlet, so that we can split the presentation logic and we can retain the presentation logic in only a single servlet, the last servlet. Understood? Thus, how the request dispatching mechanism will be. And another way, okay, of creating a request dispatcher object is using a servlet context object. The request dispatcher can be created in two ways. The first way is using a request object. The second way of creating a request dispatcher object is, okay, using a servlet context object. The second way of dispatching a request is using a servlet context object. Even using the servlet context object, we can create a request dispatcher. Even using a servlet context, we can create a request dispatcher object. Earlier, I have used a request object to create a request dispatcher, but now I am using a servlet context object to create a request dispatcher. Request dispatcher object can be created in two ways. The first way is by using the request object dot get request dispatcher. The second way is using servlet context object dot get request dispatcher. Request dispatcher can be created in two ways. The first way is by making use of the request object. Request dot get request dispatcher. That's what we have discussed earlier. Now, another way of creating a request dispatcher is using a servlet context object. How we can get a servlet context object in the servlet means by explaining the method get servlet context. Get servlet context, the header portion will give you the servlet context object. So, I am explaining the get request dispatcher method of the servlet context object. Okay? In either way, we can create a request dispatcher. Now, I did not change anything. Just I have changed request.get request dispatcher to servlet context.get request dispatcher. That's it. Let's compile. Let me start the server. Let me try to refresh the browser again. Just I'm giving some username and password. Submit. Okay. What it is telling? Path hello.first does not start with a forward slash character. Okay. It's telling that path hello.first does not start with a forward slash character. Okay, if the URL contains a forward slash, then it is said to be a absolute path. Okay, absolute URL. Okay, the URL pattern contains a forward slash, then it is a absolute URL. If you use a request dispatcher which is created through request object, then we need not to give absolute URL. But if we go for servlet context.request dispatcher, it expects a absolute URL which has a forward slash. So let me give a forward slash. Let me give a forward slash. Understood? So, if you want to make use of select context.getRequest dispatcher, we should give a absolute URL pattern. We should give a absolute URL pattern. That means which is preceded by a forward slash. Just I have compiled the application. I have restarted the server again. Let me go for login.html. Refresh the browser. Just I have given username and password. It's not compiled, sorry. It was not saved. It's still in a red mark, so let me save this. Stop the server. Earlier I have modified but not saved. Let me compile the application. Restart the server. Go for login page. Refresh the browser. So the same thing happened. Okay, the same thing happened. The request is being dispatched from first servlet to second servlet, login servlet to first to second, and login to first is included. But when going from first to second, since it is forward, the response buffer is cleared. Only the second servlet response is included in the browser. Understood? Understood, Sharan? But the servlet context.getRequest dispatcher will expect a absolute URL. That means the URL which is preceded by a forward slash. Okay? And why we should go for another request dispatcher mechanism if you already have request.getRequest dispatcher? Understood? If you already have request.getRequest dispatcher, why we should go for context.getRequest dispatcher? Okay? Request.getRequest dispatcher is confined to a web application. Request.getRequest dispatcher is confined to a web application. That means if you create a request dispatcher using the request object, okay, then we can forward or include a request only to that particular web application, to a web resource only in that particular web application. Understood? Let's consider like there are two web applications, Hello app, okay, and some HCU app. Okay, if you want to send or if you want to dispatch a request from servlet of Hello app to servlet of HCU app, I cannot do that if I go for request.getRequest dispatcher. But we can achieve that if we go for context.getRequest dispatcher. Understood? Servlet context will be specific to a web application. Hello app will have one context, something like HCU app will have another context. So, if you want to dispatch a request from one servlet of one web application to another servlet of another web application, then we cannot achieve that using request dispatcher or a request dispatcher which is created through request object. If we create a request dispatcher through request object, we cannot send or we cannot dispatch a request from one context to another context. That means from one web application to another web application. We cannot do that. But we can do the same. We can do the same if we use or if we create a request dispatcher object using a servlet context. Understood? That's how it will be. Okay? But in general, within the web application, we won't use servlet context.getRequestDispatcher. If you are dispatching a request from one servlet to another servlet within the web application, if you are dispatching a request from one servlet to another servlet within the web application, then we won't use servlet context.requestDispatcher. We use request.getRequestDispatcher. When we go for servlet context.getRequestDispatcher means when we are dispatching a request from one servlet of one web application to another servlet which belongs to another web application. So, when we are dispatching a request from one context to another context, understood? What is context here? Context means the servlet context. Okay? When we are dispatching a request from one web application to another web application, or from one context to another context, in that case, we create a request dispatcher object by making use of the servlet context object. But within the web application, if you want to dispatch a request from one servlet to another servlet, then we won't go for context.getRequestDispatcher. We definitely go for request.getRequestDispatcher only. Understood? That's what is the difference between a context.getRequestDispatcher and request.getRequestDispatcher. Okay? And if you use a request dispatcher and if you want to forward or include a request from one context to another context. Okay, if you want to forward a request from one context to another context, okay, using request dispatcher, okay, we need to do some configuration in the context.html. The context.xml, there will be a tag, I did not remember, there will be a tag with the name cross context or something, some tag will be there with the source web application and the target web application, something like, I do not remember that exactly, I will let you know tomorrow. But if you want to dispatch a request from one web application to another web application or from one context to another context, we need to do two things. Okay? First thing is we need to configure that in context.xml that this is the source context and this is the target context, or this is the source web application and this is the target web application. I may use or I may dispatch a request from source to target. That configuration will be done in context.xml. I'll let you know tomorrow. That's the first thing. Okay. The second thing is we should create a request dispatcher only through servlet context. If you want to dispatch a request from one context to another, we need to do two things. The first thing is we should make use of a cross context. Okay, we should do some configuration in the context.xml of the Tomcat server. Okay, telling that I can dispatch a request from this web application to this web application, this source to this target. That configuration should be done in context.xml. That I will let you know tomorrow. The second thing is we should create a request dispatcher object. Only based on servlet context by making use of servlet context object. By doing these two things, by setting up a configuration in context.xml and by creating a request dispatcher using the servlet context object. Using a request dispatcher, we can dispatch a request from one context to another context, from one web application to another web application. But the bottom line here is the request parameters cannot be available. The request parameters will not be available in the target web application. The request parameters will be available only in the specific web application. The request parameters cannot be transferred from one web application to another web application. But if it is from one servlet to another servlet within the same web application, the request parameters will be available even in the target. But if we go for context.getRequestDispatcher and we are dispatching the request from servlet of one web application to another web application, then request parameters will not be available. Understood? So, anyhow, at any cost, we cannot send request parameters from one context to another context. Request parameters are context specific. At maximum, we can send request parameters from one servlet to another servlet within the same context. But we cannot share the request parameters between multiple contexts. We cannot share request parameters between multiple web applications or multiple contexts. At maximum, what we can do is we can share request parameters between one servlet and another servlet within the same context through request dispatcher mechanism. But we cannot share request parameters from one context to another context or from one web application to another web application. That's not possible. Understood? How a request dispatcher can be used and why a request dispatcher is used? Understood? Now, if you see in the browser address bar, what is the target servlet displayed here? Which servlet content is displayed in the browser? Which servlet content is displayed in the browser? Second servlet content is displayed in the browser. Okay? Now, what is the URL here? Which servlet URL is there in the browser address bar? Login servlet URL is there in the browser address bar. So, from the browser, first the control will come to login servlet. From login servlet, the request is dispatched to first. From the first servlet, the request is dispatched to the second servlet. But is that information known to the browser? Understood my question? See, from login, first from the browser, the control has gone to the login servlet. So, the login servlet information is displayed in the browser address bar. And again, in the server side, from login servlet, the request is dispatched to the first servlet. From first servlet, the request is dispatched to the second servlet. Is that information known to the browser? No, that information is not known to the browser. Okay? So, the browser address bar still points to login server. But at the back end, in the server side, the request is dispatched from login to first and first to second. So, now can we tell that the request dispatching mechanism will not be known to the browser? Yes. The request dispatching mechanism or the effect of request dispatching mechanism will not be known to the browser, will not affect the browser. Now, can we tell that request dispatcher is a pure server-side technique? Yes. Request dispatcher is a pure server-side technique. The browser will not be aware of the changes that are done in request dispatching mechanism. Request dispatching is a pure server-side technique. Only the server will be aware of the changes of the request dispatching action. The browser will not be aware of the changes of request dispatching action. Only the server will be aware of the changes of request dispatching action. Just because still the browser address bar is pointing to login server. That means the browser is not aware to which server the request is being dispatched. So, request dispatcher technique is a pure server-side technique. The browser will not be aware of the changes done by the request dispatcher. Everything is maintained by the server itself. And there is another way to transfer the control from one server to another server. If you want to transfer the control from one server to another server without submitting a request, okay? There is another way to transfer control from one server to another server. See, here, using a request dispatcher, we are transferring the control from one server to another server. We are navigating from one server to another server by using a request dispatcher. Okay, another request dispatcher, we have other way to navigate. control from one servlet to another servlet. Okay, that is a response object. Even using a response object also, we can navigate from one servlet to another servlet. Okay, but how we can navigate from one servlet to another servlet using a response object? That we'll see. Understood? Using the request object, we can navigate from one servlet to another servlet using a request dispatcher. But even using a response object also, we can navigate from one servlet to another servlet. That we'll see. Okay, how we can navigate from one servlet to another servlet using a response object. Now let me comment this. Okay, now I'm not performing the interaction between servlets using request object. Okay, I'm not using request dispatcher to communicate between servlets. Okay, I want to establish the communication between servlets using response object. How I can establish communication between two servlets using a response object means there is a method send redirect. The send redirect method will take absolute URL. Send redirect method will take a absolute URL. The same way, let me try to redirect to second. Okay, there are two ways of communication between servlets. Between two different servlets, if you want to communicate two different servlets, there are two ways. The first way is using a request dispatcher. The second way is using a send redirect of response. The first way is request dispatcher, and the second way is using the send redirect of response object. Using these two ways, we can communicate two different servlets. Now, let me try to compile. Let me try to stop the server. Compile the application. Press compile. Let me restart the server. Okay, let me give the values. Okay, Rajesh and 1, 2, 3, 4. We should give a definite absolute URL here, where we should provide even the web application. What we do? What is the name of hello app? So, for response.send redirect, we should give the exact absolute path along with the web application name. Compile the application, restart the server. So if you see here, it's going for port number / hello.first. So
Let me go login.html, refresh the browser. Username and password. You can submit. HTTP page is not supported by this URL. Yeah, that's one more thing I forgot to discuss. There's one more thing that I forgot to discuss. Let me compile the application, execute the application, and so
Is the URL reflected in the browser? Is the target URL reflected in the browser? Which servlet response is there in the browser? Here, in the browser, the content is of the second servlet. Is that reflected in the browser address bar? Yes or no? Yes. Okay. The send redirect is a bit typical. Okay. The first thing about send redirect is how we can redirect a request. How we can redirect a request to a target servlet means just by using the response object, we execute send redirect with a absolute URL. That absolute URL should contain the web application, should contain the context name. The absolute URL should contain the context name. Otherwise, we cannot redirect a request from one servlet to another request. Sorry, one servlet to another servlet. If you want to redirect a request from one servlet to another servlet, okay, first thing that we need to give is we need to give a absolute URL, a perfect absolute URL along with the context name. The context name or web application name is one and the same. Okay, sometimes I may refer context name, sometimes I may refer web application name. Context name and web application name are one and the same. Okay, so just by using the web application name slash the URL pattern, we should redirect the request from one servlet to another servlet. Okay, now if we redirect from one servlet to another servlet, what happens? What happens when we redirect a request from one servlet to another servlet? Means what we do. So when we send a request from browser to server, okay, and if we dispatch, now it is the server. It is the server. Okay. If we send a request from browser to server and it goes to the login servlet, and from the login servlet through request dispatcher we are dispatching the same request from first login servlet to first to second. Now, is it known to the browser? No. This mechanism, this dispatching is not known to the browser. But if the same thing happens to send redirect, the same thing happens to send redirect. Okay, from the browser, if you go for URL, okay, something like slash login.html, and we have username, password, and submit. Okay, when we submit the form, what we'll do is the control will come to login server. The control will come to login server. Okay, in the login server, what we are doing? We are sending a redirect to hello.first. That means first servlet. We are redirecting the request to first servlet. If we redirect the request to first servlet, what happens is, now this is my first servlet. When we redirect the request, what happens is, the response will be sent to the browser. The response will be sent to the browser, and the browser will make a new request to the server. That means when we send the redirect, that means we send the response dot send redirect of some absolute value. Let's go select this hello dot false. That means the web application name slash hello dot false. Then what it will do is, first response will be sent back to the browser, and from the browser a new request will be generated to go to the first server. So from the, if it is a send redirect, how it happens is, the response will go back to the browser, and so that browser will reflect the same hello dot first, and a new request is generated from browser to first server. And again from the first server, what is happening is, response dot send redirect of slash hello FM app slash hello dot second. Now we are redirecting the request to the second server. Even in this case, what happens? From the first servlet, the response will go back to the browser. And again a new request is sent from the browser to the second server. So if you go for hello dot second, a new request is sent from the browser to the second server. So the browser address bar will reflect the latest server to which the controller is redirected. Okay? And can we get the request parameters of login servlet in the second servlet? Can we get the request parameters from login servlet in the second servlet? Is it possible to get the request parameters from login servlet in the second servlet? No. Why? Because the response has hit the browser. Again, new request has been generated to trigger the first servlet. From first servlet, a response has been triggered, sent to the browser, and a new request has been sent from the browser to second servlet. So this new request will not contain those request parameters. Understood? So we cannot transfer request parameters from source to target if we go for send redirect. We cannot transfer request parameters from source to target if we go for send redirect. And the second thing, if you want to make use of send redirect mechanism, okay, we should override only do get method. Just because send redirect is a get request. Send redirect, what it will do? It will give the response back to the browser. From the browser, a new request is sent to the target server. That new request that is sent to the target servlet is a get request. Send redirect will send a new request to the target servlet, which is a get request. So in the target servlet, we should override do get method. Then only we can make use of send redirect mechanism. Understood? From the login servlet, the response in the send redirect mechanism, the response will go to the browser. From the browser, a new request is sent to the target server. But a new request that is sent from the browser to the the target servlet is a get request. So there should be a do get method overridden. In the target servlet if you want to make use of a send redirect. Understood why we should override do get method in the target servlet if you want to go for send redirect? Just because, okay, the send redirect mechanism, okay, will create a new request from the browser. That new request created from the browser is a get request. Okay, so we should override do get method in the target servlet if you want to redirect, okay, we want to redirect the request to that servlet. Understood? And the second thing is, since the URL is overridden, okay, since the URL is overridden and the new request is sent, the request parameters of the source will not be available in the target. Request parameters of the source will not be available in the target. Request parameters of the source will not be available in the target. If you go for send redirect. If you go for send redirect, request parameters of the source will not be available in the target. And when we go for a send redirect means, in general, we go for a send redirect. Okay? If you want to transfer request parameters, that is the first case. The second case, where we generally go for send redirect is cross context. That means, if you want to redirect the response from one servlet of one context to another servlet of another context. That means from one servlet of one web application to another servlet of another web application. In general, we go for send redirect. If you use request dispatcher for the same, what we told, we should configure that in the context.xml, and then we use get servlet context.get request dispatcher, and then only we can do that. But that additional configuration that we do in the context.xml is not required if you go for send redirect. Understood? If you go for send redirect, that additional context configuration is not required. Directly, just we can execute a simple step, a single line of code. Response.send redirect / web application name / web resource name / URL pattern. That's it. Let's select, if I want to transfer the control to another application, just I'll go for svap / hello. That's it. Only a single line of code will be enough to transfer the control of one servlet of one web application to another servlet of another web application using a send redirect. It's very easy through send redirect. But if you want to achieve the same using request dispatcher, the first thing is you need to configure that in the context.xml explicitly. You should restart the server. Okay? And in the application side, you should use get servlet context. You should create a request dispatcher using servlet context only, so that you should change the application code. So these complexities are involved. If you want to make use of a request dispatcher to send a request from one context to another context. But if you want to do the same using send redirect, it's a direct simple step. Just response.send redirect of the web application name / the web resource URL pattern. That's it. Understood? We go for redirect in two scenarios. One scenario is if you don't want to send any parameters within the web application. And the main scenario where we go for send redirect is if you want to send a redirect, or if you want to communicate between multiple servlets of different contexts, then that process will be very easy. Okay? We go for send redirect. That is the main advantage of send redirect. Okay? Can you list out the differences between request dispatcher and send redirect then? Okay? Just go home, list out the differences between request dispatcher and send redirect, and come with a list tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll discuss that first, and then after we'll move to session management. Session management, it will take a couple of days. After session management, okay, we'll discuss the response and request headers. We have seen the request will have request headers and response will have response headers. Okay, what are the request headers and how to make the difference? What are the response headers and how they will make the difference? Right, that we will see. Okay, that is the completion of servlets. Okay, by this end of the week, most probably we will complete servlets and we will even start JSP. Okay, if possible tomorrow we stretch a little bit more up to 8:30 and complete the session management. If possible, I'm not assuming it, but if possible, we'll stretch a little bit more and we'll complete session management. Okay, and then after we'll discuss these headers, the question and response headers. And tomorrow, be there at 6. Today many of the people are there at 6:15, 6:20 like that. Be there at 6 so that we can start at 6. So we can have more time to discuss. Okay? But